The hook rain stitched the night together in silver threads, the kind that soak through a man's bones and make a city feel like it's turning its back. Street lamps hummed, halos trembling in the downpour, while neon signs flickered, promises most people could never afford steakhouse oyster bar chefs tasting, glowing like little kingdoms behind glass. Taxis hissed along the curb. Umbrellas bloomed and folded like dark flowers. Somewhere a siren sighed and then lost interest. On the sidewalk a man moved with the quiet rhythm of survival. He had the posture of someone who used to stand straighter. His coat was the color of old asphalt, sleeves frayed to fringe, pockets turned kind from years of holding too little. His name was Daniel, but tonight he was just another shadow in the rain, another silhouette the city chose not to see. He kept his head down, shoulders rounded against the cold, one hand in his coat and the other cradling a paper cup with 3 coins that clicked like teeth when they knocked together. He paused under the awning of a gleaming restaurant where warmth pooled golden against the windows. Inside, people laughed the easy laughter of the well-fed. Wine glasses lifted like tiny chandeliers. Knives flashed silver. Napkins unfurled across laps as if hunger were a ceremony and not a need. A waiter, sharp in black and white, bowed toward a table and revealed a slice of something dripping butter. A flame kissed a steak and the whole room leaned toward it, faces lit like they'd seen a miracle. Out here the rain ticked on Daniel's shoulders, and the miracle was simply that the awning held. He looked up, the way a man looks at a door he knows won't open. His reflection in the glass floated above a tray of oysters like a ghost that had shown up to the party without an invitation. He swallowed. In his pocket, a folded bill and 2 crumpled singles did their best to feel like enough. They weren't. He knew it. He knew, too, that the hottest thing he'd held all day had been a coffee, someone left half-finished on a bus stop bench. He'd turned the paper cup in his hands to savor the heat like it was a fire. A couple swept past him, perfume and cologne cutting through the damp. The woman laughed, bright as glass breaking, and Daniel stepped aside, letting their umbrella take the space where his body wanted to be. He murmured, "Sorry," in a voice polite enough to make itself small. They didn't hear him. The door opened, the heat sighed outward, and he watched the pair disappear into a world where rain was just a sound against the window, not a weight on your back. He moved on. Between the restaurants and the rain, the city felt like a one-way mirror, though people inside seeing only themselves, the people outside seeing everything. A billboard overhead promised success in bold letters, "Conquer your year," while water crawled down the model's perfect jaw, as if even the advertisement was crying for someone else. That's when he saw it. At the edge of an alley, where the light shook itself into a shiver and the pavement slanted toward a storm drain, something huddled against a cardboard box that had learned the word soaked. 2 yellow-brown eyes blinked from the shadows, a thin shape, all angles and tremble. The dog did not bark. It didn't have the strength. Its fur stuck to its skin in clumps, ribs counting themselves under a wet coat, tail curled tight as a fist. It watched Daniel the way a survivor watches a door, hope and fear braided together. Daniel stopped. For a long second the rain talked for both of them, hiss, tap, whisper, before he lowered himself into a crouch. The dog flinched, muscles coiling. To flee, but there was nowhere to go. The alley ended in a wall tattooed with old posters and newer apologies. Daniel opened his hands, palm up like a man offering a prayer without words. "Hey," he said softly. The sound was warmth trying to make a home in winter air. "Easy there." He reached inside his coat, past the cold fabric, past the pride that kept him from asking for help most days, and found the small crinkled paper bag he'd bartered for earlier, the end of a loaf from a bakery that closed at dusk. He pulled a piece free, the crust cutting his thumb, and placed it on the pavement. Rain freckled it instantly. He slid it closer. The dog's nose twitched, a step forward, a step back. Hunger won. Teeth met bread, careful and quick, as if a hand might snatch it away. It chewed with its eyes always on Daniel, not trusting the gift to be free. He tore another piece, set it down, waited. The dog ate again, a little less frantic, this time. Somewhere behind Daniel, A door cracked open and laughter spilled out in a warm wave, and he felt it pass through him without touching. He smiled anyway. "There you go," he whispered. "There you go." A couple of boys in dress shirts and loosened ties drifted past, eyes bright with the kind of energy that thinks it invented the night. One of them slowed, took in the scene, and jabbed his friend with an elbow. "Dude," he said, loud enough to bruise. "He's feeding a dog." A snort. "Bro can't even feed himself." They walked on, the joke trailing behind them like a string cut from a kite. Daniel let it go. He broke the last of the bread into smaller pieces so the dog wouldn't choke rushing it. His thumb bled a little where the crust had sliced him, a thin red ribbon that disappeared into the rain the moment it landed. Above them, a screen in a window blazed a sports highlight. A table cheered. A car rolled by with music thumping a heartbeat that belonged to someone else. The city kept being a city, indifferent, enormous, full of rooms where good things happened and corners where they didn't. Daniel looked at the paper bag, empty now but for crumbs, and then at the dog whose eyes had softened from warning to wonder. It took a cautious step toward him, then another, and pressed its cold nose against his knuckles as if to say the only thank you it had language for. He laughed under his breath, the sound small and surprised. His shoulders loosened. For the first time that day, he didn't feel entirely alone. A bus splashed through a puddle and sprayed the curb. The rain, relentless, started to blur the edges of things. Signs, faces, the line between what hurts and what heals. And somewhere down the block, in the shelter of a dark doorway, a tall figure in a hooded sweatshirt watched the scene with a stillness that wasn't indifference but intent. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the city didn't notice. Its heartbeat was the same. Impatient traffic, hurried footsteps, neon signs flickering even after the sun had risen. People moved with purpose, phones pressed to ears, coffee cups steaming in their hands. No one slowed down to look at the man sitting on the corner, his back against a brick wall that still held the night's dampness. His name was Daniel Carter. Once that name meant something. Once it was stitched into uniforms, printed on paychecks, carved into a wedding invitation. Now it was a whisper he spoke to himself sometimes, just to remember that he was more than the shadow people saw when they glanced his way and quickly looked elsewhere. Daniel was a veteran. He had served 8 years in the Army, his hands steady on machinery that kept others alive. He had been disciplined, proud, the kind of man who stood tall even when the world tried to bend him. But wars don't just live overseas. Sometimes they come home with you. And sometimes they take everything before you realize the battle has followed you back. It started with the layoffs. The factory job he had counted on vanished in a single meeting, his years of service replaced by machines that never asked for raises. Then came the hospital visits. His wife Julia coughing too hard, too often. Cancer didn't care that they had savings. It didn't care about military service or hard work. It devoured. He sold his truck first, then the house, then everything inside it that wasn't essential. He worked odd jobs until his body gave out, until the nights spent on hospital chairs left his back twisted and his knees stiff. And when Julia finally slipped away, taking her laughter with her, Daniel found himself adrift. No house, no savings, no reason to go back to the factory town where every corner still whispered her name. So he ended up here, just another man on the margins of a city too busy to care. This morning his breakfast was the same as yesterday, a paper cup with 3 coins rattling inside. He had found one near the subway turnstile, another in the gutter outside a liquor store, the third given by a woman who didn't even slow her stride, just dropped it in without looking at him. He set the cup beside him and watched the tide of humanity rush by. Men in suits checking their watches, women in heels balancing lattes and briefcases, students with earbuds in, lost to their music. Not one pair of eyes met his. He had learned not to take it personally. People weren't cruel, not always. They were just trained to look past him. He pulled his coat tighter around himself. It had once been military issue, heavy wool designed to take punishment. but the years had chewed it thin. The lining was shredded, the collar frayed, and one pocket was torn open along the seam. Still, it was his shield against the cold. Daniel never begged loudly. That wasn't him. He didn't thrust the cup in people's faces or shout for help. He just sat quietly, nodding politely when someone happened to glance his way. "Good morning," he'd say, voice rough but still courteous. Sometimes he'd add, "Stay warm out there," even when his own breath smoked in the air like frost. But most people didn't answer. He tilted his head back against the wall and let his eyes close for a moment. Behind the lids, he saw her again. Julia. The way her hair used to fall into her eyes when she laughed. The way she'd stand on tiptoe to straighten his tie before church. He remembered her humming in the kitchen, her hands always busy, her voice soft when she said, "Danny, no matter what happens, we'll make it through." The memory was so sharp it stole his breath. He opened his eyes quickly, afraid he might break in half if he lingered there too long. "Sir?" Daniel blinked. A boy, couldn't have been more than 10, stood in front of him with his mother's hand tugging at his arm. The boy held out a half-eaten granola bar, sticky with chocolate. His mother hissed, "Come on, don't bother him." But the boy ignored her. Daniel smiled faintly and accepted it. "Thank you, son." The boy grinned and ran to catch up with his mother, who glanced back once with an expression Daniel knew too well, pity mixed with discomfort. She whispered something to the boy, probably about not approaching strangers. Daniel broke the granola bar in half, tucking the rest into his coat pocket for later. The sweetness lingered on his tongue. For a moment, it tasted like kindness. By mid-morning, the sidewalk was crowded with people heading toward the financial district. Daniel tried to stay small, folding his legs under him, holding the paper cup steady on the ground. Every so often, a coin would clink inside, but more often people brushed past without a word. A businessman stepped too close and muttered, "Watch your stuff, buddy," as though Daniel had chosen the spot just to inconvenience him. Another, the sound was faint at first, a whimper, half swallowed by the city's endless noise. Daniel stopped mid-step, unsure if he'd imagined it. The street around him pulsed with neon signs, cars splashing through puddles, and hurried voices tangled with horns and footsteps. But there it was again, a low, broken cry, like the sound of something trying not to be heard and failing. He turned toward the alley wedged between a convenience store and a shuttered repair shop. It smelled of rain-soaked cardboard and rusted metal, the kind of place people avoided without realizing they were avoiding it. In the shadows, two faint pinpricks of light blinked. Eyes. Daniel squinted. At first he thought it might be a cat, but as the figure shifted he saw the outline more clearly. A dog. A stray. Its fur was matted, clumped from the rain. Ribs jutted through its thin frame like prison bars, each breath making its sides hollow and expand in painful rhythm. Its ears were pinned back, and its tail was tucked so tightly it was almost invisible. The dog shivered, trying to make itself smaller against the cold bricks, as though the wall might swallow it whole. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew that. Posture. He knew what it felt like to make yourself smaller, quieter, hoping the world would pass you by without harm. "Hey there, buddy," he whispered, his voice gentle, almost unsure. The dog flinched at the sound, pressing harder into the wall. Its eyes darted, wild, ready to bolt at the slightest movement. Daniel crouched slowly, ignoring the sharp protest from his knees. He kept his hands open, palms facing up, showing he carried nothing threatening. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog didn't move. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled napkin with half the granola bar the boy had given him earlier. He unwrapped it carefully, breaking off the smallest piece, and placed it on the wet ground a few feet away. "There," he said softly. "Something for you." For a long moment, the dog didn't budge. Then, slowly, it stretched its neck forward, sniffing the air. Hunger fought with fear, a battle Daniel recognized all too well. Finally, trembling, the dog inched forward, snatched the crumb, and retreated back to its corner. Daniel smiled faintly. Good boy. Or girl. Whichever you are. He broke off another piece, placing it closer this time. The dog hesitated longer, paws shifting nervously against the concrete. Then again it darted forward, snatched the crumb, and pulled back. Bit by bit, Daniel closed the distance, moving the food nearer to him. His hands shook, not from fear but from the ache of wanting to be trusted again, even if it was just by this fragile creature. By the time the last crumb was gone, the dog was only a foot away, its damp fur smelling of rain and neglect. Daniel extended his hand, palm open. The dog froze, ears twitching, eyes locked on him. Then cautiously, it leaned forward and sniffed. Its nose brushed his skin, cold and wet. Daniel held his breath, not daring to move. Finally, the dog licked, his palm once, quick, nervous but real. Daniel's throat tightened. He let out a shaky laugh, one that felt like it came from a part of him he hadn't touched in years. Guess we're both hungry, huh? The dog tilted its head as if it understood. Rain dripped from the alley's awning, pattering onto the ground beside them. Daniel sat cross-legged now, the granola bar gone, his hand still resting near the dog. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel like a ghost pressed against the wall of a city that never saw him. Someone or something was looking at him. The bond was fragile, but it was there. A silent agreement between two broken souls. You're not alone, not tonight. Daniel rubbed his hands together for warmth. Wish I had more to give you, buddy, he murmured. But if I find something, I'll share. Promise. The dog, as if answering, lowered itself to the ground, curling its thin frame near his feet. Its trembling eased slightly, though hunger still gnawed at its ribs. Daniel leaned, back against the wall, pulling his coat tighter. He hadn't realized how heavy his chest had felt until now, as though just having another presence beside him lightened the load he carried. But the city wasn't kind. A couple passed by the mouth of the alley. The rain had eased into a drizzle, but the cold was relentless, wrapping the city streets in a damp chill. Daniel shuffled along the sidewalk, his coat heavy with water, his pockets light with nothing but the faint rattle of a few coins. He reached into his pocket and counted them again, his fingers fumbling over the rough edges. 3 quarters, a dime, 2 nickels, 85 cents. He laughed bitterly under his breath. It wasn't enough for a bed, not enough for coffee in most places, but maybe, just maybe enough for something small. The dog trotted beside him now, still cautious but closer than before. Every few steps it glanced up at him with those dark, uncertain eyes, as if unsure if this fragile alliance was real. Its fur clung damply to its thin body, and each rib showed with every breath. Daniel stopped at the corner where a fluorescent sign flickered weakly against the mist. A fast food place, greasy fries, dollar menus, and warmth that smelled of salt and fried chicken. Through the glass, people sat in plastic booths, laughing over burgers, sipping sodas, scrolling through their phones without a care. Daniel swallowed hard. His stomach twisted with hunger at the sight, but when he glanced down at the dog shivering against his leg, something in him shifted. Come on, buddy, he whispered, pushing open the door. The sudden warmth and bright light of the restaurant hit him like a wave. Heads turned briefly, eyes flicking over the wet coat, the unshaven face, the dog lingering uncertainly near the door. Most people looked away just as quickly, their interest gone. Daniel approached the counter, placing his coins carefully on the surface. The cashier, a young man with a paper hat tilted slightly off-center, raised an eyebrow. What can I get you? Daniel counted the coins one more time, embarrassed at how small they looked spread out on the counter. Cheapest sandwich you've got, he said softly. The cashier stared at the pile of change, sighed, and tapped the register. Value sandwich, 83 cents with tax. He slid the receipt across without another glance. Daniel took the wrapped sandwich in both hands, the warmth of it bleeding into his fingers. His stomach growled so loudly it startled even him. He hadn't had a real meal in 2 days. Every instinct screamed at him to unwrap it right there, to sink his teeth into bread and meat and forget the gnawing emptiness inside. But when he turned, he saw the dog still at the door, waiting. Its eyes were wide, hopeful, trembling with hunger. Daniel's chest tightened. He walked slowly, crouched down and unwrapped the sandwich with care as though it were something sacred. The dog sniffed, tail twitching uncertainly. "Here," Daniel said gently, breaking the sandwich in half and placing it on the ground. The dog hesitated only a moment before diving in, devouring the food with desperate speed. Its tail wagged, for the first time thumping weakly against the floor. Daniel smiled despite himself. He broke off another piece and held it in his hand. This time, the dog licked his fingers before snapping up the bite. "You needed it more than me," Daniel whispered. For the first time all night, warmth bloomed in his chest, not from the sandwich he didn't eat, but from the sight of the dog's gratitude. But not everyone saw it that way. Laughter erupted behind him. A group of teenagers at a booth near the window had their phones out, recording. "Yo, look at this," one of them snickered, pointing. "The dude's feeding a dog instead of himself, what an idiot." Another mimicked Daniel's voice, exaggerated and mocking. "You need it more than me, boy." The group howled with laughter. One girl shook her head, still filming. "Can you believe this? He's starving and he's wasting food on a mutt." Pathetic. Their laughter rang louder than the rain outside, sharper than the hunger in his belly. Other diners glanced over, some smirking, some pretending not to notice. No one defended him. Daniel felt the burn of shame creep up his neck, but he didn't turn toward them. Instead, he looked down at the dog, now licking the crumbs off the floor, tail wagging harder with each bite. He smiled, not forced, not bitter. Real. "He needed it more than me," Daniel repeated softly, his voice steady despite the jeers. The dog looked up at him then. The drizzle had thickened into a steady rain by the time Daniel left the fast food place. The flimsy paper wrapper from the sandwich flapped loosely in his hand before he dropped it into a bin. The dog walked close at his side now, belly full, for the first time in days, tail wagging faintly. Daniel pulled his coat tighter around himself, his body shivering despite the warmth blooming in his chest from the small act of kindness. His stomach still growled, but he ignored it. Watching the little mutt trot beside him was enough to dull the ache. The city street glistened with rainwater, neon lights shimmering across puddles. Music and laughter spilled out of a nearby upscale bar. The door swung open, and a group of young men stumbled out into the night, slick hair, sharp suits, cologne heavy in the damp air. They were drunk, loud, and carried themselves like they owned the pavement. At first they didn't notice Daniel. But then one of them, a tall man, with slicked back hair and a tie loosened around his neck, spotted him and stopped. His grin widened into something cruel. "Oi, look at this," he said, elbowing his friend. "A beggar with a pet." The others burst into laughter, circling in closer like hyenas around prey. Daniel lowered his head and kept walking. The dog pressed closer to his leg, sensing the shift in energy, its ears flattening. Another man, short and stocky, pulled a crisp bill from his wallet. He waved it dramatically like dangling bait. "Here, old soldier," he slurred, pretending to salute. "You want a tip for feeding your dog before yourself?" The group howled, but instead of giving him the bill, the man crumpled it into a ball and flicked it at Daniel's chest. When Daniel caught it instinctively, he realized it was nothing but a scrap of paper. The men roared louder, their laughter echoing down the wet street. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He slipped the paper into his pocket without even glancing at it. The tall man leaned in, sneering. "What's the matter? Too proud to thank us for charity?" The dog growled then, a low, protective rumble. Its hackles rose, lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. It stepped forward, ready to defend the only person who had shown it kindness. The men hesitated, but only for a moment. Daniel crouched quickly, placing a calming hand on the dog's back. His voice was low, steady, soothing. "Easy, buddy. Don't waste your energy on them." The mutt whimpered softly, glancing between Daniel and the suited men before settling reluctantly at his side. One of the men mimicked the growl, bending over and baring his teeth like a clown. "Oh, scary little mutt. Careful, boys, it might flick us to death." Laughter again. Louder. Crueler. Then another, emboldened by the others, picked up a half-eaten burger from his takeout bag. He hurled it across the sidewalk. It hit Daniel square in the chest, ketchup and lettuce sliding down his coat. The men exploded in laughter, doubling over, slapping each other on the back. Daniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, he brushed the food from his coat, his fingers sticky with sauce. His dignity felt like it was sliding off him with every drop of ketchup, but he didn't retaliate. He couldn't. Not here. Not like this. The dog barked once, sharp and angry. Daniel stroked its head quickly, whispering, "No. Don't. You're better than this. We're better than this." The crowd around them thickened. Passers-by slowed, drawn by the commotion. Some watched with curious eyes, others with quiet pity. But no one stepped in. No one spoke. The wealthy men, drunk on laughter and cruelty, reveled in the silence. The tall one leaned in so close Daniel could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You don't belong here," he hissed. "Beg on another street. Or better yet, disappear." The words cut sharper than the rain. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of every humiliation, every night spent alone, every kindness ignored. But then he opened them again and looked at the dog beside him, loyal, trembling. The rain pattered harder now, drops bouncing off the neon glow of the street lamps, streaming down the glass windows of restaurants where laughter and warmth thrived. On the opposite side of the street, a tall figure sat beneath the flickering awning of a modest diner. His hood was drawn low, shadows cloaking most of his face. In front of him sat a tray, barely touched, a simple plate of eggs and toast. He'd been there a while, eating quietly, unnoticed by the crowd across the street, but his eyes hadn't left Daniel. The commotion, the laughter of the suited men, the thrown food, the old soldier's quiet dignity, had pulled the attention of everyone nearby, but none more than him. He leaned back, massive arms crossed, his presence still and heavy like a storm waiting to break. People walked past him without a second glance, assuming he was just another late-night customer. But those who looked closely would see something different, the calmness in his posture, the power in his silence. For a long moment he didn't move. He simply watched Daniel brush ketchup from his coat, watched the dog bristle and growl, watched the crowd do nothing. His jaw tightened beneath the shadow of his hood. Then, whispers began. A pair of teenagers leaving the diner froze, mid-step, their eyes widening. "Bro," one whispered, tugging his friend's sleeve. "Don't look too fast, but isn't that him?" The other risked a glance, then clapped a hand over his mouth. "No way. No way, he's just sitting here." Nearby, a woman waiting for her cab squinted through the rain. Her phone slipped slightly in her hand. "Wait. Oh my God. Is that—" The whispers spread quickly, leaping from one person to another like sparks. People stole glances, snapping quick, blurry photos, disbelief painted on their faces. Some gasped quietly. Others smiled in shock. The suited men didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, too busy mocking, too drunk on arrogance. But the crowd's eyes had shifted, no longer fixed only on Daniel. They were flicking toward the man in the hood, then back again, waiting, anticipating, and then he moved. Slowly, deliberately, the man pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood against tile was soft, but in that moment, it felt thunderous. He stood, towering, immense, his frame filling the awning and then some. Even through the rain, his presence seemed to push the air heavier, thicker. The whispers grew louder. "It's him. It has to be him." The man adjusted his hood, tugging it slightly back. Not enough for a full reveal, but enough for the light to catch his jawline, the unmistakable silhouette. Now the crowd wasn't just watching, they were holding their breath. Step by step he walked forward, boots striking the wet pavement with a weight that reverberated across the street. The rain splashed against him, rolling off his shoulders as if even the storm didn't dare linger on him. The suited men paused mid-laughter, finally noticing the subtle shift in the crowd. Their chuckles faltered as they realized dozens of eyes were no longer on them, but on something or someone behind them. "Who the hell is that?" the tall one muttered, his grin flickering. No one answered. No one needed to. Because by then, the man in the hoodie had stepped off the curb, crossing the street with unhurried power. Each stride was measured calm, yet carried an energy that made the onlookers instinctively step back, clearing a path without being asked. The dog noticed first. Its ears perked, growl softening, tail giving a hesitant wag. Daniel, still crouched, low to calm it, followed the dog's gaze. He froze, his tired eyes widening as the figure approached. The suited men straightened, trying to mask the unease creeping into their posture. The tall one forced a laugh. Too loud, too shaky. "What, you think you're gonna play hero now, buddy? You don't even—" But his words trailed off. Because as the hooded man drew closer, the crowd's whispers became undeniable gasps. Foam. The rain drummed harder against the city's neon glow, streaking rivers of light across the pavement. For one suspended moment, the entire street was silent, an unnatural hush broken only by the hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the low hum of the street lamps. Then the hooded man reached up. His massive hand gripped the edge of the hood, pulling it back with a deliberate motion. The shadow slipped away and the light from a nearby shopfront caught his face. Gasps exploded from the crowd. "It's him!" someone shouted. "Oh my God! That's Dwayne Johnson! The Rock! It's The Rock!" The name rippled through, the onlookers like lightning striking dry timber. Phones shot into the air, flashes blinding against the rain, recording every frame of what had just become an unforgettable moment. The Rock's face was calm, unshaken by the chaos of recognition. His eyes, however, burned with quiet intensity. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, each stride carrying the weight of authority, of presence, of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room, or in this case, an entire street. He moved past the stunned crowd and stopped directly in front of Daniel. The homeless veteran, still kneeling beside the trembling dog, looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a second, Daniel seemed almost embarrassed, as if he didn't deserve the attention of such a man. But the Rock didn't look at him with pity. He looked at him with respect. Then slowly, the Rock turned to face the young men in suits, the so-called elites, whose arrogance had poisoned the night. Their grins had vanished. Their mocking laughter was gone. In its place, unease. They shifted. Under the weight of his gaze, suddenly small, suddenly exposed, the Rock's voice rolled out like distant thunder, deep, steady, impossible to ignore. Enough. Just one word, and the street froze. He stepped between Daniel and the bullies, his broad frame a wall of strength, a shield that no cruelty could penetrate. The dog stopped growling, its instincts recognizing something: protection, safety. The Rock glanced back at Daniel briefly, his eyes softening. Then he turned fully toward the men who had mocked him. "You think you're rich because of the suits on your backs? Because of the money in your wallets? Because you can throw food at a man who has none?" His voice didn't rise, but its intensity made the air feel heavier. None of them answered. They couldn't. The Rock took a step closer. Rain ran down his face, glinting under the neon lights, but his expression was carved in stone. "I know what it's like to have nothing," he said. "I know what it feels like to be invisible, to walk down a street and have people cross to the other side. I know what it's like to be judged by what you wear, by what you don't have, instead of who you are." The crowd went utterly still. Every word felt like it was being hammered into the soaked pavement. "When I was 14, the Rock continued, his voice tightening, "I watched my mom cry as we were evicted from our home. We had nothing, no roof, no security, just each other. And I'll never forget standing there watching her try to be strong for me, when inside she was breaking." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some lowered their phones, shame flickering across their faces as they realized they had once judged men like Daniel without knowing their story. There was a point in my life when all I had in my pocket was $7, The Rock said, holding up his hand, fingers spread wide with just 2 tucked in. $7, that's it. And I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I'm just another nobody the world chews up and spits out. His chest rose and fell, his breath misting in the cold rain. But let me tell you what I've learned. His tone hardened. Money doesn't make you rich. Respect does. Integrity does. The courage to give when you have nothing, that's real wealth. He turned and pointed at Daniel, who was still kneeling with one arm protectively across the dog's back. This man, The Rock said, his voice carrying across the street, is richer than all of you combined. You know why? Because he gave when he had nothing left to give. He saw a life weaker than his own, and he shared what little he had. That kind of heart, that kind of strength, you can't buy with money. You can't fake it with fancy suits. You either have it or you don't. Daniel blinked rapidly, his lips parting in disbelief. His shoulders trembled, not from the cold anymore, but from the weight of words that were lifting him higher than he thought possible. The bullies shuffled uncomfortably, their arrogance crumbling. One of them tried to laugh it off, but it came, out, shaky, hollow. The Rock's gaze cut him off instantly. You mocked him. You recorded him. You laughed like cruelty was entertainment. But the applause still echoed in the rainy night, rolling down the street like a storm tide. Daniel sat frozen in the center of it all, his soaked jacket clinging to his frame, the stray dog pressed close against his side. His heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from the impossible weight of being seen. The Rock raised his hand, and the clapping slowly faded. His voice, calm but commanding, broke the silence. Daniel, he said, crouching down beside him. If you're willing, I think the people here need to hear your story. Daniel's lips parted, eyes widening. He shook his head faintly. My story? No. No one wants to hear about me. The Rock leaned closer, his massive frame sheltering Daniel from the rain. Brother, look around you. They've heard me. They've seen what you did. But if they knew who you really are, what you've lived through, they'd never forget it. Tonight isn't about me. It's about you. The crowd leaned in, the cameras lowered for once as though everyone felt the gravity of the request. Daniel swallowed hard. His hand tightened around the dog's scruffy fur, grounding himself. Slowly, painfully, he nodded. I'll try, he whispered. The Rock gave a reassuring nod, his hand steady on Daniel's shoulder. That's all anyone can ask. Daniel looked down at the wet pavement, his reflection staring back at him in broken neon colors. His voice trembled as he began. I wasn't always like this, he said. I used to have a life, a home, a family. I served my country. I was proud. To wear the uniform, gasps rippled softly through the crowd. Some straightened, suddenly ashamed they had ever looked at him as just another beggar. When I came back, Daniel continued, his tone steadying. I worked construction. Long days, hard work, but honest work. I built houses, offices, schools, places for other people to live and dream in, and I was proud of that too. He paused, blinking against the rain. His voice broke as he said the next part. Then my wife. She got sick. The Rock lowered his head respectfully. The dog whined softly, nuzzling closer as if sensing Daniel's pain. She was everything to me, Daniel whispered, tears mixing with rain. Her name was Emily. She had this laugh that could make the worst day feel light. But when the cancer came, it didn't matter how hard I worked. The bills piled up. I sold everything I could. Our car, our furniture, every last thing worth a dime. Still, it wasn't enough. The crowd shifted uneasily, faces wet with more than just rain. I held her hand every night in that hospital, Daniel said, his voice cracking. And I promised her I'd never let her feel alone. I kept that promise. But when she was gone, I lost more than my wife. I lost my world. His shoulders shook as the words left him. Some in the audience quietly sobbed, others covered their mouths. After that, I couldn't keep up with the rent, Daniel continued. Work dried up and I slipped through the cracks. One day I had a house. The next, I had nothing but this jacket and the streets. He stopped, drawing a shaky breath. He looked down at the dog beside him, rubbing the back of its neck gently. And then I found him, Daniel said softly. Or maybe he found me. Skinny, shivering, digging through the trash for scraps. People walked right by him just like they walked by me. But when I looked at him, I saw myself, alone, forgotten, hungry. The dog wagged its tail faintly, pressing into Daniel's side as if to say, "Thank you." So I shared what I had. Daniel continued, even if it was just a crust of bread, because no one, man or animal, should ever feel forgotten. The words hung in the cold air like a prayer. The crowd was silent, breathless, many wiping their eyes. One of the suited men who had mocked Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his face red. Another looked at the ground, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Their earlier laughter seemed monstrous now, exposed for what it was. Daniel lowered his head again, embarrassed by his own vulnerability. "I'm no hero," he muttered. "I'm just a man trying to survive, a man who misses his wife, a man who wants to matter again." The Rock leaned in, his voice strong, steady, filled with conviction. The rain still fell, but it felt different now. Less like punishment, more like cleansing. The neon lights glistened against wet pavement, reflecting not just cold city life, but something warmer that had sparked in the hearts of those who had gathered. The Rock still stood tall with his arm around Daniel's shoulders. His voice was firm but tender as he spoke directly to him. "Brother," he said, "you've carried this burden long enough. Tonight it ends. You don't have to walk this road alone anymore." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black card, holding it high enough for all to see. "I'll cover Daniel's shelter tonight, not just tonight, until he's steady again. Food, a warm bed, clothes. He won't be left out in the rain another night." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by an eruption of applause. Daniel's eyes widened, his lips parting in disbelief. I don't know what to say," he stammered, tears mixing with the rain. "You don't have to say anything," the Rock said gently, his voice steady as a rock itself. "Just accept what you've earned, the respect and love of every soul here." The waiter from the small fast food place where Daniel had bought the sandwich stepped forward, his apron damp from the rain. "Sir," he said, holding out a paper. This isn't much, but here's a hot meal on me, no charge." Daniel accepted it with shaking hands. He looked down at the stray dog, who barked softly, tail wagging as if it understood. "First one's yours, buddy," Daniel whispered to the dog, his voice breaking again. The moment touched something deep in the crowd. A businessman in a tailored coat, who only an hour earlier had walked by without even glancing at Daniel, stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Johnson, sir, I own a construction company. We could use a man with Daniel's skills. If you're willing, son, there's a job waiting for you." Daniel's mouth fell open. He stared, unable to believe his ears. "A job? After all this time?" The Rock's hand squeezed his shoulder. "Looks like life's opening the door again," he said with a smile. A woman pushed through the crowd next. She carried a wool blanket in her arms, wrapped in plastic. "I bought this for my son," she said softly, "but he has plenty. Please take it. Stay warm tonight." Her hands trembled as she pressed it into Daniel's arms. He pulled it close, burying his face in the dry wool. "Thank you," he whispered. Others followed. A young couple handed over folded bills. A teenager removed his hoodie and gave it to Daniel with a shy smile. A mother pressed sandwiches into his hands. One by one, strangers became family, each offering what they could. The Rock looked around at them, his chest swelling with quiet pride. "This," he said, gesturing to the crowd, "is what real strength looks like. Not mocking, not tearing down, but lifting up, standing together. One man gave when he had nothing, and now all of us are reminded. We can give too. The dog barked again, circling happily, its tail wagging like a flag of victory. Children knelt to pet it, laughing through tears. Someone asked its name. Daniel smiled faintly for the first time in years. I never named him, he admitted. But maybe tonight's the night he gets one. Hope? A voice called from the crowd. Daniel looked down at the scruffy dog, who licked his hand as if agreeing. He nodded slowly. Hope, he whispered. Yeah, that fits. The dog, Hope, sat proudly beside him, no longer a forgotten shadow in the alley, but a symbol of everything the night had become. The once cold street was alive now, transformed by compassion. Where there had been laughter at cruelty, there was now applause for kindness. Where there had been isolation, there was unity. Daniel looked up at the rock, his voice shaking. Why me? Why help me? Out of everyone. The rock bent low so only Daniel could hear. Because I've been where you are. I know what it feels like when the world looks through you. But I also know what it feels like when one person decides you matter. And tonight it was your turn to be reminded. Daniel broke down then, not in shame, but in gratitude. He covered his face with both hands as the dog pressed against him. The rock placed a steady hand on his back, letting him cry. When Daniel finally lifted his head again, he wasn't the same man who had walked the streets unseen. He wasn't the forgotten veteran or the hungry beggar or the man mocked for his kindness. He was something more, seen, heard, valued. The rock straightened and raised his voice once more, speaking to every soul gathered under the rain. The storm finally began to ease, the rain softening into a mist that shimmered beneath the glow of the city lights. The street that had once been cruel, filled with jeers and silence, now pulsed with something entirely different. Strangers had become allies, compassion had replaced apathy, and one forgotten man had reminded the world of a truth it desperately needed to remember. The camera lingers on Daniel, no longer hunched, no longer hidden. He stands beneath the neon glow with a blanket wrapped over his shoulders, food in his hands, and Hope, the little dog who had found him, as his companion. For the first time in years, his steps are steady, his eyes lifted. He is not invisible anymore. The narrator's voice rises deep and resonant, carried by the swell of emotional strings. That night, a homeless man taught the world what true wealth looks like. He had nothing, yet gave everything. And in doing so, he reminded us that the richest hearts are not the ones full of gold, but the ones willing to share their last piece of bread. The rock's silhouette is shown in the background, standing tall but humble, his hood drawn up once more. He isn't seeking attention. He isn't seeking fame. He's simply a man who stepped forward when no one else did. Daniel gained something, far greater than money. He gained dignity. And the crowd who once stood in silence learned the power of compassion. They learned that strength is not measured in status, but in the courage to lift someone who has fallen. Clips roll through the faces of the onlookers. The businessman who offered a job, the woman with the blanket, the teenager who gave away his hoodie, the couple who pressed money into Daniel's hands. Each of them changed. Each of them reminded that kindness is contagious. And the rock reminded us all of a truth too often forgotten. Greatness isn't measured by what you keep, but by what you give. The music swells higher, echoing with a soft piano layered beneath sweeping strings. The final image lingers, Daniel walking down the street, Hope trotting beside him, tail wagging proudly. For the first time in years, he isn't walking alone. The narrator's final words strike with the weight of timeless truth. Remember this. One act of kindness can change the story, not just for one man, but for all who witness it. True greatness has nothing to do with wealth, power, or fame. True greatness lives in respect, and respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. The camera pans upward, past the wet streets, past the glowing neon, into the night sky. The rain has cleared, the stars are visible. Fade out,